You need to have a thought through plan on sex abuse, on, a pastor passing away suddenly, or a staff member or something like that, or somebody getting arrested. I mean, I hate it, but that happens, and we see it all the time, and pastors and churches and church communicators aren't ready for it, and somebody says the wrong thing. And it's not just like, what do we say, but like, who's going to say it? How do we communicate to our people about what happened? What do we need to communicate to our people? How far to get into the details of whatever it may be? You need to know and kind of have, and every situation's different, but at least have some kind of thought through plan. So whenever that happens, like you said, you can reach for that folder and you've got it, and you know exactly what, kind of a framework, and then, call your friends and ask for help too. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
This is season 3, episode 9 of the Missional Marketing Podcast. I'm Bart Blair, the co-host of the show, and it is my privilege to welcome you to this week's episode. Our goal with this podcast is to help your church grow by leveraging digital marketing and effective communications. We want to help you be better at communicating internally in the context of your church, so that the people in your church know what they're supposed to know and know when they're supposed to know it. And we also want to help you use digital tools like your website, social media, email, and the other content that you're creating online to reach more people in your community for Jesus. That is our heartbeat. We want to expand God's kingdom. And so we thank you for tuning into the show. We hope that you're finding it helpful. If you do, make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. If you're watching on our YouTube channel and you have subscribed, make sure that you also hit the little bell icon so that you get notified when we have new episodes, which we try to drop every Friday. We're getting pretty good. Been pretty consistent lately of having a new episode every Friday. And also, if you haven't left us a rating or a review wherever you're consuming the content, we would love for you to do that. That'll both help more people find the podcast, but it'll also help us know what content you're finding to be most beneficial. And that would mean a lot to us if you would do that. So, hey, today I'm going to introduce our guest to you. And I was going to say that this is going to be a special treat for you. I don't know if it's a special treat for you, but it was a special treat for me. Our guest this week is Jonathan Howe, who is the Vice President of Communications for the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee. And the reason that this is a treat for me is that I have actually listened to Jonathan Howe on a number of different podcasts for years. In fact, one of the ones that stands out to most for me is I listened to Tom Rainer's Rainer on Leadership, and Jonathan Howe was the co-host of that podcast for many, many years. And so I listened to it. His voice was familiar to me. I feel like he's somebody that I knew, although I didn't really know him until we got online and recorded a podcast. And so Jonathan is a great leader, experienced in a lot of different areas as it relates to marketing and communications. And today he serves the entire Southern Baptist Convention, making sure that the people in their churches all around the globe are informed of the things that they need to know. And this is a really interesting episode. We talk about a variety of things, but make sure that you stick to the end. One of the things that we sort of tackle in this podcast is how to navigate rough waters when it comes to communication. If you've tuned into anything in the Southern Baptist Convention the last couple of years, you know that there's been some controversy, there have been some challenges. And Jonathan, as the Vice President of Communications for the entire SBC, has been responsible for making sure that the right messages are being communicated in the right way to the right audience. And I think as a church communications professional or volunteer, whatever your role is, if you're responsible for communications, you need to be prepared for sometimes having to communicate things that aren't necessarily fun. Not everything is a fun social media post. Sometimes you got to write stuff and you got to communicate things when times get tough. And Jonathan addresses those things. And I find that his insight is very, very helpful. So that's all I got for the intro this week. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode, season 3, episode 9. Glad that you're with us. And so I'm going to flip things over to my co-host, Jason Hamrock, the CEO of Missional Marketing. And here's our interview with Vice President of Communications with the SBC Executive Committee, Jonathan Howe.
Well, Jonathan, welcome to our podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Jason. Good to be on with you and Bart.
Yeah, and you are coming from the wonderful state of Tennessee.
Yeah, just outside of Nashville here.
Man, yeah, as I said a little bit earlier, it seems like everybody's moving to either Arizona, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee.
We've got it all covered here. Jonathan, are you a native of Nashville or of Tennessee?
No, I'm a Louisiana native. So grew up in Baton Rouge, big LSU fan, Saints fan, that kind of thing. And I've progressively been moving more northern as I've gotten older. So
I'm a fan of saints, just different saints, not those saints. Okay, nice, we've covered that. We know where we are geographically. Hey, Jonathan, why don't you just share your ministry story with us, or your ministry journey? Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do today, but certainly how you got there.
Yeah, well, I didn't plan on being where I am today. Grew up, in a pastor's family. My dad was a kind of bivocational pastor. So I've been around the church my whole life, in Southern Baptist my whole life, really, which goes well into my current role, I guess you could say. But really wanted to work in sports marketing, sports communications, and had really kind of started doing that, event production and the sports side of things. Went to school for that at Southern Miss in Hattiesburg. And thought that's what I wanted to do. And actually, it was what I wanted to do. I mean, if somebody called today and said, "Hey, come on," that would be a hard discussion that I'd have to have. But got married to my wife, Beth, right out of school. And we had a couple of kids early on in our marriage. We don't know what it's like to be married without kids, basically. We've been married almost 20 years, and we have an 18-year-old we just took to his first day of college just a couple of weeks ago out in California. So that was a whole different type of emotion for us. But we got married and started having kids basically right away, and working in sports and having a growing family. And my wife's into ministry. She's a children's minister, worked in churches all her life as well. And it was like the Lord saying, like, look, do you want to have a family and and serve me? Or do you want to have a family, or basically, do you want to work in sports? That was basically the choice there, because the time demands are pretty rough in that world, especially in the level I was at, kind of at the small colleges or small professional sports teams, those kind of things. Minor league baseball I was working in, and then out of the blue, got a call from the Women's Missionary Union, which I don't know if many of your listeners are familiar with that. It's an auxiliary of the Southern Baptist Convention, and to come do marketing for books. And I knew Christian books. I didn't know publishing, but I knew books because I read a lot, as you can see behind me here. And then just randomly fell into this job in Birmingham. It wasn't random. The Lord was in it. And because of one thing led to another, got to know some people up at Lifeway here in Nashville, and worked with them over the couple of years. And then a job came open up in Lifeway in 2011 to come up and help Tom Rayner and Ed Stetzer kind of build their online platforms. Yeah. And it came up and just threw some gas on those things, and they just took off, and kind of the rest is history. And now, after about 9 years of that, moved over to the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention as a vice president for communications, and have been there 3 years. So the Lord has opened up some doors that I never saw coming, and I've been thankful for that, and really excited about where I am now, and how we're able to impact 47,000 churches and put 13 plus million people on mission for the kingdom.
So let's break that down a little bit. How do you actually do that? What's your role look like?
Well, it depends on who you ask, because some people would say he does it poorly. But we have a lot of touch points that we have with Southern Baptist, a lot of partners. I mean, we can't do it ourselves. We have a lot of partners, including our 12 national entities, plus the WMU. That includes 6 seminaries with 25,000 students. So there's a lot of touch points going on through partnerships, and that especially with our 41 state conventions and the outlets that they have, the state papers, state newsletters, things like that they have. But the big piece that I kind of oversee, I don't oversee like the day-to-day. We have somebody, an associate vice president under me, that oversees the day-to-day for convention news. That's Brandon Porter. But he runs Baptist Press, and that is our big convention news piece, about 6 million page views a year. We have a couple of podcasts that we do. We're on 130, I think, radio stations across the country, on a 3-minute radio bit that we started earlier this year in partnership with Moody Radio and a few other independent public or radio stations. And, we've got a magazine that hits all of our churches. And then a weekly podcast I do that I've been doing since 2015 with Amy Whitfield, who co-hosts that with me. It's SBC This Week. So it's kind of a news recap kind of thing. And then we've really cranked up our YouTube stuff over the last few months. So we're hitting all the platforms and all the information, trying to get out there where people are. And get them out, really, the truth about what's going on in the SBC. There's a lot of disinformation out there from people inside and outside the SBC, but also just the good news of how God is working in and through Southern Baptist around the world.
Okay, so you're a lot about communications, right? And no doubt you're your voice and your leadership, you speak into churches and how to help them become better. Mm-hmm. So, from your lens, what do you think churches these days, after COVID, what are churches struggling with when it comes to communications or clarity or direction, how to communicate better with not only their people, but how are they reaching more and more unchurched, de-churched people?
Yeah. Well, I think you have a few different levels there. You had churches that were pre-pandemic. I think in our world, in our lifetime, I think we're all going to look at pre-pandemic, post-pandemic kind of thing. Yeah. But pre-pandemic, they were already jumping in, swimming in the deep end of the pool in the digital space. They knew how to, they had email newsletters, they had online streaming, they had it all. Websites, apps, you name it, they had it, they were working on it, and they were doing it. And post-pandemic, they've just gotten better at that. And so there's a lot of churches like that, but there are a lot more churches that had no clue what they were doing digitally pre-pandemic and are trying to build the plane in the air now, especially during the pandemic, and are really trying to play catch up. And it's a steep hill. The good thing is, there's groups like yours that come alongside them and help them out. And there are, a lot of groups out there that help them take content, put it online, get it into the right places, get it to the people. But it's been a struggle because they weren't equipped or they didn't have the equipment. Like I'm talking like equipped, like know how or know what to use to get things in the right places. So I think that's the struggle most churches are having. Your average church of 200 or, even 75 or 150, whatever it may be, that doesn't have somebody full-time, that's relying on a volunteer, that isn't really trained for what they're doing in a digital sense. They may be trained or know, how to do communications, inter-office communications, that kind of thing. They don't have the people, the training, or the technology right now, or they didn't, at least pre-pandemic. And they have it and they don't really know how to do it. They're the guy that just learned how to drive, trying to drive a sports car or something. And really that's the struggle I'm seeing with churches right now, is that they know what they need to be doing. They don't quite know how to get there though.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because when churches talk to me about this, and it's a small church, 125, 150 people, I said, well, don't pretend to be something you're not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because they see the big mega church down the road and all the stuff they're doing, the production, and this is what their live stream, we need to look like. No.
In my opinion, I'm a huge fan. So I'm going to say something here. I'm a huge fan of using digital tools, but not to live in a digital world. We live in a world where relationships matter. You see people, you shake their hand and hug them. That's ultimately where I think it needs to end up. You can start online, but it can end up there. So for those smaller churches, go back to knowing what you know what to do. Yeah. Right. Start shaking hands and inviting people and all that kind of things. Let digital be something you can get into, but you don't have to just totally put all your focus in there, because you won't be able to.
No. And that's the draw, I think, of a lot of small churches. People like small churches. Why do they like, and we're saying small churches, those are normative sized churches. Let's be real. That's the normal size church. But they like those 100 to 125 to 150, 200 size churches because they know the people and they can connect with them.
That's right.
And that's the attraction of a church that size. And if you're trying to use digital to be something you're not, it's not really going to help, because what people really want from your church is those relational connections. And I think what we want in a gospel community is that relational connection. Even if we're in a large church, we still want those sizes and those groups, from going into sitting in rows to sitting in circles, as Ed Stetzer would say, is getting those relational touch points, getting that connection. And communication is the means to the end, but it's not the end there.
Right. I think, we're kind of got off on the digital front, but still, when you talk about making sure you share your story, making sure that you communicate what you're about as a church, you should be known for something, right? Not what you're against, but known for something. And so I think maybe do you guys do this where you're trying to help churches articulate that message?
A little bit. I mean, we don't really run a communication service. We're happy to talk to different churches and stuff, but what we want to do is we want to communicate what Southern Baptists are for. From my office, like what's important to the vast number of Southern Baptists, and how are Southern Baptist churches, how are Southern Baptists communicating that to the lost in their neighborhoods and to the nations as well. So, our goal from my seat and from our office is to help tell those stories and help to highlight how God is working in and through Southern Baptist to share the gospel in their community, in their neighborhood, and around the world and the nations.
That's got to be incredibly encouraging, right? Because it's like stay on mission, right?
Yeah.
We're on mission to save, to go after the one.
Yeah. And it's fun to tell those stories. Those are the stories we have the most fun telling. I mean, we had one this week, the week we're recording this. We heard about a church in like rural Louisiana. It's not rural, but it's like not in a big city, Louisiana. And they hired a new youth guy, and he's kind of come in and taken the area by storm. And they had 260 youth at a church that runs like 400 the other night.
Wow.
260 youth on a Wednesday night, 125 of them visitors, had 23 salvations. Just this incredible event of just this random church in the middle of Louisiana.
That is so cool.
Not in a major city, just because they're going and they're building the relationships. They're getting their people outside of the walls to invite others to come, and the Lord is blessing that. So, those are the exciting stories that we get to tell. And, it really comes back to relationships and the stories that people are telling on the ground with those around them that are, maybe close to them, but near to them, but far from God.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question about that, Jonathan. I think sort of what you're doing and the way that you're doing it can translate into the context of a local church with a church
absolutely.
Communications director for a couple of reasons. One of the things that we're constantly trying to emphasize with churches is their need to be storytellers, not just announcement makers, right? We don't want to just simply make everything that we're communicating about where you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to sign up, what side dish you're supposed to bring, but to actually be communicating and telling stories, celebrating the wins. So let me ask you a couple of really practical questions. And maybe because of your specific role, you're not as involved in the decision-making here, but maybe you can kind of talk me through the process. Number one, how are you gathering the stories that you're telling? Because this is a problem that a lot of churches have. Jason, I'm thinking of one specific church. It's a large church, campuses all over the place. And we've been working with them to try to get them to tell more stories. And they just have a really difficult time collecting those stories. Yes. Secondly, you mentioned in your intro that you have a number of different outlets for communication, from printed media to the website to podcasts and the other. How do you decide what information gets distributed on what channels? So there's really sort of two questions in there. One is, how are you collecting these stories? Like, who's responsible for that? How are you getting that? And then once you decide what needs to be communicated to your primary audience, how do you decide which is the best platform, the best medium, the best channel for communicating those things? All
right. So to start with how we're collecting them, that takes intentionality. It's rare. Now, it does happen, but it's rare that a story just falls in somebody's lap, right? I mean, even if you're on a local church, it's rare that somebody just comes up and said, "Pastor, you will never believe what happened to me." I mean, that does happen. But a lot of times it's more you having a relationship with somebody, talking to them and asking questions and following people online on social media, those kind of things, to know what's going on in their lives. There's a pastor here in Nashville that I know pretty well. And like every time I'm with him, he's telling me stories about people in his church. He's telling me about the person that he went and saw at the hospital, visited in the hospital, and just like, not like just, they're, dealing with X, Y, and Z in the hospital. It's like, no, here's their life story. Like, he gives me a lot of information. And I mean, those type of people, those in your church, those are the kind of things that drive stories in the local church, is getting to know your people. You can't tell the story of your people if you don't know your people. As if you're on staff, if you're on, doing pastorate or whatever it may be, even if you're like a Sunday school teacher or whatever it may be, just a volunteer, you've got to know your people. So it takes intentionality to find those stories. It doesn't just fall in your lap a lot of times. And that's the thing with us. Like we have websites, we have Facebook groups that we follow, we have people on Twitter and things like that. We're always looking for things. And once you have that lens, you start seeing everything that happens as a story, a potential story. And that just takes the reps. So it takes, relationships. It takes repetition. It takes you doing the work, putting the work in to find the stories. The more work you do, the easier it gets on the rep side of things. And in a local church, I mean, it's as simple as whenever, this is one of the most effective things I've seen from local churches is where we talk about telling stories, is baptism videos. If you can't do baptism videos and you just do it live, have some interview questions or whatever when you're baptizing them. In the Southern Baptist Church, we take a minute to do that a lot of times because you got to go all the way under. It depends on what type of faith tradition you're in and how quick or what that looks like. But a lot of our churches have gone to where they're doing baptism videos where maybe they don't show the whole video in the service. Maybe it's just online later on the Facebook page, something like that. But they use that and they tell the person's story of coming to faith. And there's nothing more powerful than somebody's personal story of coming to faith. And it's just, regardless of the age, those are powerful stories every time you hear them, because you can see bits and pieces of how the Lord's working differently in that. And the people that were involved in that, how much more encouraged can you be as a member in a church to know that you had a hand in somebody's eternal salvation? Let's go right now. That'll get you fired up. And those are the kind of stories. And that's the easiest opportunity I think churches have to tell stories and the power of story in the church. Another is and we kind of got away from this because of COVID, but the offering moment, the time for your worship through giving of tithes and offerings, the ability to say, look, here's what our church's money's doing. We're impacting this ministry. It's done this. We're doing this. And people are coming to Christ because of your giving, because of what's going on in your, in our church, because you people in the church are generous, you're faithful, and you're giving to what the Lord is wanting us to do. And those are really powerful stories. And just 2 instances in a worship service that you can use the power of story really to make an impact and to get people to invest and do more in the local church.
Hey, Bart Blair here. I'm the producer of Missional Marketing's Church Growth Interviews podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. At Missional Marketing, we're passionate about helping churches reach more people for Jesus online. And one of the ways that we do that is by helping churches acquire more new visitors to their website utilizing the Google Ad Grant. Google offers qualifying nonprofits, including churches, up to $10,000 a month in advertising. That means that you, as a church, could be using Google as one of your primary digital outreach strategies to communicate the gospel and reach more people in your community. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website at missionalmarketing.com and click the link at the top of the page that says Google Grants. We'd love an opportunity to partner with you in your mission to build God's kingdom here on earth. Well, thanks again for listening to our podcast. And now back to the show.
You're going to have to remind me of the second part of the question.
What platforms?
What platform?
How do you decide what's the right channel to distribute which stories, which pieces of news?
It depends, I guess. I don't really know. I don't really have a set or that's a good story for this thing or whatever. We don't really have a rubric for that kind of thing. It's just the stories that are good, they get more attention. That's kind of where you have to triage your content. Just like whenever you're doing announcements, the ladies crocheting meeting on a second Tuesday of the month does not get the same announcement time slot and in volume as the fall festival that's church wide. It's kind of thing. The A content, B content, C content. If the A content's what you run with in all your platforms, B you may just hit 1 or 2 spots, and then C maybe just a digest item on a website somewhere or something like that. That's how we look at it. And I think the same would kind of go across as you're looking at how you're doing your newsletters, bulletins, whatever it may be in the local church. So the big things get the most play across all the different platforms.
Yeah. As a communications professional, you're adapting and growing, and how much are you guys using other platforms? Like in particular, everyone's kind of using Facebook, Instagram, they obviously have their website. Are you guys getting into more like TikTok? Are you encouraging churches to get into using TikTok and short form videos, or what?
You don't know very many Southern Baptists, do you?
Yeah.
You don't want them on TikTok. No, I'm kidding. We're not really in the emerging technologies. The key is always you want to be where your people are, right? Be where your people are. And if your people start migrating to new platforms, then be there. It's always helpful to try to experiment and nothing get out of your rut. We don't really have the content that I think really fits like a TikTok or an emerging brand or social platform or whatever. We have good content for the traditional, digital media type platforms. It is something that we're working toward. I will say that. We do have a lot of video content, and we just don't have the manpower right now to work on it. We just hired somebody. Actually, she started yesterday from a local church, and she started working with us, and she's going to come in and really take our digital content marketing up a notch because we needed it. I'd had that spot open for about a year trying to figure out what to do with it and what type of employee to hire. And as we look toward the future, it was like, look, I need somebody that really understands the digital content area and what we need on that side of things. So went out and found somebody, and I'm really excited about her coming on board with us this week. But, she's got the talent and the ability and the tools to take it into a digital space that is an emerging technology or emerging platform, whatever it may be. Whether that be, trying to figure out how to get us like on a Be Real type platform or TikTok, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And something that may come down the road. It's going to take some more planning on our side to just try to figure out how do we take our existing content into this, or how do we build content for the future for this platform. So,
we're not looking for the Jonathan Howe TikTok show online anytime soon.
No,
okay.
Won't be.
All right.
Won't be duetting videos with or dances with Costin Meyer or whatever it is.
Well, I get really excited about that kind of thing because, for our listeners, you want to start going there. TikTok is the fastest growing platform. Yeah. It's getting way more traction than Google. It's growing up. It's not teenagers using TikTok. No.
You just have to figure out how your content fits on the platform.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to fail.
Well, this is something. Yeah, this is something you might find interesting. I do have a question that I want to ask, but one of our partners at Missional Marketing, his name's Earl. Earl has shared this story with us a couple of times because our assumption is that the majority of people that are on TikTok are really young people. They're our kids, right? Teenage kids. And Earl shared with us, he is getting close to or is at Medicare age. And Earl shared with us that he actually found a TikToker that explains all of the nuance and the process for applying for and getting approved for Medicare. And he said, that was the best solution that he found anywhere on the interwebs to solve the problem of figuring out what he was supposed to do. And so it was actually a TikToker explaining to senior citizens, what step by step, what the process was to apply for Medicare. Yeah. And I think a lot of churches and communications leaders, we just kind of naturally assume that our primary audience is going to be on TikTok is going to be young people. When the reality is more and more older people are spending time on TikTok. Yeah. They're just not as forthright about it.
Maybe not creating, but it's a big consumption platform as well. So as little as they may be creating, they're consuming a lot.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I kind of go back to when I said, be where your people are. Well, your people are going there and they are there. And at some point you've got to figure out how to get your content into that. Maybe that's sermon clips, maybe that's something else. I don't know. But you've got to start thinking that way. And that's kind of that's why I made that hire that I made recently, is because we've got to start thinking that way. So if it's getting there. It's almost to a necessity.
If your people are the lost sheep, go there.
Yeah.
And
hey, I've got a communications question, kind of big picture strategy type of question here. You took your current role, 2019, right before the pandemic. You said that you'd been doing the SBC Weekly or whatever it was, the show, for several years before that. So you were aware of stuff, going on in the SBC. Then you take this role, and then the pandemic hits. And of course that completely changes everything. And then, the last year and a half has been pretty tough for the SBC in terms of whether it's real news or fake news. It's certainly a lot of opinions out there. As the leader of the lane organizationally, as far as communication is concerned, how do you navigate some of those turbulent waters? We have church leaders, church communications professionals who most of us, we're praying we never have to deal with a crisis or a controversy in the context of our ministry, but unfortunately it does happen. What advice do you have based on the experiences that you've had the last few years for communications directors who might find themselves in a situation where there's something controversial, something challenging that needs to be communicated? It needs to be communicated well. And how do you refute all the other stuff, or do you refute all the other stuff that's negative or false? Let me let you run with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something, it has been a very difficult last year and a half or so. Much of it has to do with, I would say, we deal with a lot of disinformation. We also deal with a lot of mistakes made by people that are no longer around. And I think, that's one of those things where the frustration may be the most high, is that being the people left behind or now in charge, trying to figure out how to communicate about something that somebody who's no longer here did or did not do years ago. That's a difficult task. If you're at a church and something happens or something comes up about something that happened 10, 15 years ago at the same church, and now you're having to deal with a PR crisis for something nobody around you ever even knew about or had any playing in, what do you do? That's frustrating, because you're like, this ain't fair. I didn't do anything about this. Why am I having to deal with this now? I could understand how churches could be very frustrated about that. The last couple of years have been difficult. And what I've learned is there's often a point where you can, I wouldn't say get out of the pain process or whatever it is, but there are a lot of off ramps along the way. Along a lot of times, the key is to recognize them and to do the right thing early on. You save yourself a lot of pain on the back end. The key that I've found is that you can only do the right thing whenever you have the opportunity. Like just do the right thing when you have the opportunity to do it. Whatever that may be, the communications, just say the right things. Don't think that you can just kind of move on to the next thing without dealing with it right then. A lot of times, like I said, there are a lot of times that you don't realize the off ramp or the decision that you have that are going to save you from getting too far down the road on something. Do the right thing the first time. Say the right things the first time. That'll save you a lot of pain in the end. That I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but
so as you're trying to make decisions about what gets communicated and how it gets communicated, are there other people or other resources that you've looked to for some sort of counsel or some insight? Or are you just looking at the leaders within your own organization?
For the most part, it's the leaders within, but also, it's good to have friends outside that you can bounce things off of. Having relationships with people who are smarter than you and are better at this than you is really important. Having people that you can call and say, hey, this is kind of where I'm thinking. What do you see in this situation?
Is Chris Martin smarter than you? Is Chris Martin smarter than you? Is Chris Martin smarter?
Well, no, not him as much.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure.
He calls me.
Okay.
So, no, my co-host, Amy, she's been really good for me to be able to bounce things off of over the years, and on the SBC This Week podcast, and to have somebody just to be able to run something by. Hey, what do you think of this wording? Or what do you think of this? Like, because a lot of times you get so focused on how it's going to play to you and your people that know everything about it, you forget about the people that are seeing this for the first time. And wording, word choice, quotes, those kind of things, they matter, and they hit different people different ways, because everybody's coming at a different angle than you to a scenario or an issue. So there are a lot of times where my first instinct to say something, I have to think through it 3 or 4 times before I realize, that can be misconstrued or whatever. And as communication professionals, you want people to not only hear what you're saying, but to not hear what you're not saying. I don't know if that makes sense, but you don't want to leave ambiguity for them to be thinking, oh, well, what they really meant was, this. You want to be clear, and you want to be concise, and you want people to understand exactly what you're trying to say, and not something that you're not trying to say.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I'll add on to that, because been in those situations before. You should, first of all, pray. because
Yes.
the Spirit will lead you. But we understand that's an every situation.
Yeah.
But second, I think is good to put together some ideas on what happens if, and you've got that folder sitting over there on the shelf.
Yes.
That you're not like blindsided and, oh my goodness, now what do I do?
Yeah.
Put some forethought into it, because it may happen,
it may, and you need to be ready. And if you're a local church, I mean, you need to have a communications plan. Now, you may not have the words because every situation is different, but you need to have a thought through plan on sex abuse, on, a pastor passing away suddenly, or a staff member or something like that, or somebody getting arrested. I mean, I hate it, but that happens, and we see it all the time. And pastors and churches and church communicators aren't ready for it. And somebody says the wrong thing. And it's not just like, what do we say, but like, who's going to say it? How do we communicate to our people about what happened? What do we need to communicate to our people? How far to get into the details of whatever it may be? You need to know and kind of have, and every situation is different, but at least have some kind of thought through plan. So whenever that happens, like you said, you can reach for that folder and you've got it, and you know exactly what, kind of a framework, and then, call your friends and ask for help too. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay.
That's really good. I appreciate that. I think that's really, really good advice. Something that I think we don't like to think about, the fact that that's a reality. It's not the fun part of our job as communications professionals. We're much more interested in promoting events and activities and things that are going to actually move the needle with the gospel and for God's kingdom. But the reality is that sometimes we find ourselves in damage control situation, and it is important. Hey, I'm watching the clock and respectful of your time, and know that we're kind of coming up on the end of our time commitment together. Jason, did you have any final questions or final thoughts before we give Jonathan a chance to have a parting shot?
No, well, I think there's some great things to take away from this conversation, that no matter what role you're playing in your church, you want to put thought into how you're communicating in the story that you're communicating, and be ready for any kind of scenario. But I really loved our part about, sharing and telling stories of changed lives. That just gets my heart going, and you have to work at that. That's just not going to you send out one email, then hope that they just come flooding in. It doesn't work that way. You got to work it. And I think Jonathan has explained that. So, no, thanks for being on our podcast. It was a lot of nuggets to take away and implement in our ministries.
Yeah, Jonathan, any parting shots for us? Anything you want to share before we wrap it up?
Well, I would say that one parting shot, just kind of look into the future here, and we've seen it the last few years, and I don't want to dive too deep onto this, but know that your church and you're going to have communications issues pop up moving forward. You're going to have, and it's more than likely, it's going to be something that you're not responsible for. You had no business doing, in the creation of the problem or the issue. It's going to be a result of something outside of your church, probably, or, outside of your control. Yeah. But to have patience and to just persevere through that. We've got a political season coming up, and another election cycle coming up later this year, even, and then, down into 24. That, I don't know about you guys, the last 6 years have been kind of like the most just contentious I've seen.
It's exhausting
as far as communication side of things. And, not only does your church need a plan for when things go wrong, your church needs a kind of an idea of where we're going to be with politics and stuff. And I hate to jump into politics, because that's like a really just dirty area to be for a church communications thing. It's just, there's no good way out of that. But it's real, and it's impacting our people.
Yeah.
And it's something that you need to have a plan and really think through, because it's going to impact your church. It already is impacting a bunch of our churches. And I think a lot of people that listening are go, I can tell you about this and this. But be thinking through that as we get onto these election cycles, as they come up, and how you can best steward people toward the gospel and not to politics when it comes to your communications and how you're doing things in the church, and to keep people really focused on the gospel and on what Christ has done for us and how he's moving in the world, and not on any kind of hope in a political party or, saving grace that politics may bring. So.
Well said.
I hate to go there at the end, but
well said. I was
that's
about
the
to
thing
say
that I'm like, whenever you ask me, what are you planning for? What are you thinking about next at the SBC? That's the thing, because that is the thing that is just consuming people at this point. And it's hard. And I want to see people focused on the gospel and focused on the Great Commission and not on partisan politics.
Yeah, for sure. I was about to say, pretty much guaranteed the way you are not asked back on a podcast is to start talking politics, but you landed the plane pretty well there. So, Hey, Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you.